The stagecoach door swung open in the dusty street of Salvation Creek, Montana Territory, and the woman who stepped down moved like someone who had learned to make herself invisible, her gloved hands clutching a worn carpet bag, while a heavy shawl covered her from shoulders to fingertips, despite the warm June afternoon of 1876. Clara Bennett had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis to reach this remote mountain town, answering an advertisement for a seamstress position at the general store, and she could already feel the weight of curious stares pressing against her like physical things as she stood on the wooden boardwalk, with dirt swirling around her ankles and the Rocky Mountains rising like ancient sentinels in the distance. The whispers started before she even reached the store entrance, voices that thought themselves quiet, but carried on the thin mountain air with perfect clarity. She heard the words she had heard in every town since the fire 2 years ago, the words that followed her like a shadow she could never outrun. A woman in a blue calico dress leaned toward her companion, hand cupped beside her mouth, eyes wide with something between horror and fascination. Clara pulled the shawl tighter and kept walking, her spine straight despite everything, because she had learned that dignity was sometimes the only thing a person could control. The general store smelled of leather and tobacco and the sharp tang of pickled vegetables, and Mr. Henderson, who owned it, was a balding man with kind eyes who looked at her face when he spoke to her, instead of staring at what the shawl concealed. He showed her the small room at the back where she would work, a space with good light from a western window and a sturdy table already set up with a sewing machine that gleamed with recent oiling. The pay was fair, and the room upstairs was clean, and Clara felt something almost like hope stirring in her chest as she unpacked her needles and thread that evening while the sunset painted the mountains gold and crimson beyond her window. She had been in Salvation Creek for 3 days when she first saw the mountain man, though she heard about him before their paths crossed. The other women in town spoke of him in tones that mixed respect with a touch of fear, calling him Elijah Stone and saying he came down from his cabin in the high country once a month for supplies, a man who had fought in the war and then disappeared into the wilderness, as if civilization had become too heavy a burden to bear. They said he was huge and wild-looking, with hair past his shoulders and hands that could snap a man's neck without effort, though Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house added that he had never been anything but polite in his rough way and always paid his bills in gold dust or prime furs. Clara was arranging bolts of fabric on the store shelves when the door opened and a gust of mountain wind preceded him inside. She turned and felt her breath catch despite herself, because the descriptions had not done him justice. Elijah Stone stood at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorframe, his body a mass of hard muscle beneath a buckskin shirt that had seen considerable wear. His hair was indeed long, a dark brown that caught reddish highlights from the sun, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was all strong angles, softened only slightly by a thick beard. But it was his eyes that held her attention, a striking green that seemed to see everything and miss nothing, and when those eyes met hers for just a moment before she looked away, she felt something shift in the air between them, like the moment before lightning strikes. Mr. Henderson greeted him warmly, and they conducted their business with easy familiarity, while Clara tried to focus on her work and ignore how aware she was of his presence just 20 feet away. She heard his voice for the first time, a deep rumble that matched his sighs, asking about ammunition and coffee and whether any mail had arrived for him. Then she heard Mr. Henderson mention her, explaining that he had finally found a seamstress and could now offer mending services, and Clara felt those green eyes turn toward her again, with an intensity that made her hands still on the fabric she was folding. "Ma'am," Elijah said, and she forced herself to meet his gaze with what she hoped was polite acknowledgement, nodding slightly. His expression was neutral but curious, and she waited for the moment that always came, the moment when people noticed despite her careful covering, when their faces would change, and she would see the pity or the revulsion or the morbid fascination that hurt worse than either. But Mr. Henderson was asking him something about mountain lion sightings, and the moment passed. Clara released a breath she had not realized she was holding and returned to her work while the two men concluded their business. She did not look up again until she heard the door close, and the store felt suddenly larger and emptier in a way she did not want to examine too closely. The work was steady, and the town slowly grew accustomed to her presence, though Clara made no attempts to socialize beyond what courtesy demanded. She took her meals in her room rather than at the boarding house, shopped early in the morning when few people were about, and spent her evenings sewing by lamplight while the sounds of the town's single saloon drifted up from the street below. It was a lonely existence, but a safe one, and she had learned that safety mattered more than connection when connection inevitably led to questions she did not want to answer. She was working on a particularly difficult repair, a wedding dress that needed the entire bodice reconstructed, when the door opened on a Tuesday morning 2 weeks after her arrival. Clara looked up and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest when she saw Elijah Stone standing there, a bundle of buckskin clothing in his arms and an expression of almost comical uncertainty on his rugged face. He ducked slightly as he came through the door, more from habit than necessity, and approached the counter where Clara had been carefully pinning the dress pieces together. "Miss," he said, his voice even deeper than she remembered, "I got a coat that needs mending, and Henderson said you were the one to see about it." Clara set down her pins and moved to the counter, grateful for the barrier between them. "I can help you with that," she said, keeping her voice level and professional. "May I see it?" He unfolded the coat carefully, and she could see it was a beautiful piece of work, supple deerskin with intricate beadwork along the shoulders that spoke of native craftsmanship. The damage was significant, a long tear in the sleeve and another across the back, the kind of marks that claws would make. She touched the leather gently, assessing the repair needed, and forgot for a moment to be self-conscious as her professional interest took over. "This is fine work," she said quietly. "The beading is Lakota, I think. The repairs will take some time to do properly. I will need to match the sinew and be careful not to disturb the existing beadwork." When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something intent and thoughtful that made her want to step back. But his voice when he spoke was casual enough. "A friend made it for me some years back, got into a disagreement with a grizzly and came out on the losing end, at least as far as the coat is concerned." Despite herself, Clara felt her lips twitch toward something that might have been a smile. "I would say you came out on the winning end if you are here to tell the story. Give me a week and I will have it ready." "Much obliged," he said, and then he did something unexpected. Instead of leaving immediately, he hesitated, shifting his weight slightly, and Clara recognized the body language of someone working up courage to speak. Her own body tensed automatically, preparing for whatever came next. "If you do not mind my asking," he said slowly, his eyes on the coat rather than on her, "do you work with leather regular? I've got some other pieces that could use attention, but I know not every seamstress takes that kind of work." The question was innocuous enough, purely practical, and Clara felt herself relax fractionally. "I learned leatherwork from my father. He was a cobbler. I can handle most repairs." Elijah nodded, and this time he did meet her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that was simply respectful interest, nothing more and nothing less. "That is good to know. I will bring the other things when I come back for the coat." He paid a deposit in gold dust that Mr. Henderson weighed carefully, tipped his hat to her with old-fashioned courtesy, and left. Clara stood at the counter for a long moment after he was gone, her fingers still resting on the soft leather of his coat, wondering why her heart was beating faster than circumstances warranted and why she felt oddly disappointed that he had not stayed longer. The coat repair took her full attention for the next several days, and she found herself enjoying the challenge of working with such fine materials. She matched the sinew perfectly, her stitches small and even, and took special care around the beadwork that told a story in geometric patterns of blue and white and red. As she worked, she found herself wondering about the man who wore it, about what would drive someone to leave civilization behind for the harsh beauty of the high mountains, about whether he was lonely in his solitude or whether he had found a peace there that the crowded world could not offer. She was putting the finishing touches on the repair, her window open to the cool evening air, when she heard the commotion from the street below. Raised voices, angry and getting louder, and then the unmistakable sound of fists hitting flesh. Clara set down her work and moved to the window, looking down to see a crowd gathering outside the saloon where two men were locked in combat while others shouted encouragement or tried to pull them apart. "Break it up!" That was Sheriff Morton, pushing through the crowd with the authority of his position and the weariness of a man who broke up too many such fights. "I said break it up before I throw both of you in a cell." The fighters separated reluctantly, both bleeding from split lips and abraded knuckles, and Clara was about to turn away when she caught sight of someone else in the crowd. A woman, young and painted, with the hard eyes and defensive posture of someone who worked in the saloon, doing things that polite society pretended not to know about. She was crying, and one of the men who had been fighting, a big man with a florid face and expensive clothes, grabbed her arm roughly and yanked her toward him. "You caused this, you stupid whore," he snarled, loud enough that Clara could hear him clearly. "Going around with your mouth running, making trouble." The woman tried to pull away, but his grip was too tight, and Clara felt her own body remembering rough hands and pain and terror. She turned from the window quickly, her breath coming faster, and pressed her gloved hands against her mouth to keep from making a sound. She had learned not to get involved, had learned that drawing attention only brought more trouble. But the woman's frightened face stayed with her as she forced herself back to her sewing and tried to pretend her hands were not shaking. The next morning, Clara was opening the store for Mr. Henderson, who had a meeting with the town council, when the door opened and the woman from the previous night stumbled inside. In daylight, she looked even younger than Clara had thought, maybe 20 at most, with bruises darkening on her upper arm in the clear shape of fingers. She had a dress clutched in her hands and an expression that wavered between defiant and desperate. "I heard there was a seamstress here," she said, her voice rough as if from crying or shouting or both. "This dress is torn and I need it fixed by tonight." Clara nodded and held out her hand for the garment, noting the cheap satin and garish lace, the kind of dress that was meant to attract male attention in the dim light of the saloon. The tear was along the side seam, easily repaired, but there were other signs of wear that spoke of hard use and little care. She met the woman's eyes and saw the challenge there, the expectation of judgment or rejection. "I can have it ready by this afternoon," Clara said quietly. "The repair is straightforward." Something in the young woman's face shifted, the hardness cracking just slightly. "How much?" Clara named a price that was more than fair and less than the work deserved, and the woman's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why so cheap? What is wrong with it?" "Nothing is wrong with it," Clara said. "That is the price for a seam repair." They regarded each other for a long moment, two women on opposite sides of respectability's arbitrary line, and then the younger woman's shoulders dropped slightly. "My name is Lily Crawford. I work at the Silver Bell." "Clara Bennett," Clara replied, because it seemed important to offer her own name in return. "I will take good care of your dress." Lily left and Clara set to work immediately, her needle flying through the fabric with practiced efficiency. She reinforced the seam and, on impulse, added a few extra stitches to other places that looked weak, small, invisible mends that would help the dress last longer. When Lily returned that afternoon, Clara had the garment wrapped in clean paper and ready to go, and the look of surprise on the younger woman's face when she saw the quality of the work was worth more than the coins she pressed into Clara's palm. "This is better than it was when I bought it," Lily said, running her fingers over the seam. "You are really good at this." "Thank you," Clara said, and meant it, because genuine compliments were rare enough to treasure. Lily hesitated at the door, glancing back. "That man last night, the one who grabbed me, his name is Robert Thornton. He owns the Silver Bell and half the buildings in town. He thinks he owns me, too." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "Be careful around him. He does not like women who do not know their place." Then she was gone, and Clara was left with the uncomfortable knowledge that she had been noticed by exactly the kind of man she had learned to avoid. But the days passed without incident, and she allowed herself to relax back into the routine of work and solitude, measuring her life in completed repairs and the slow accumulation of coins in the tin box under her bed. Elijah Stone returned on a bright morning when the air smelled of pine and distant snow, and Clara found herself smoothing her dress and checking that her shawl was properly arranged before she brought out his mended coat. He examined her work with careful attention, running his large fingers over the repaired seams, testing the strength of her stitches, and when he looked up, his expression held genuine approval. "This is excellent work, Miss Bennett. Better than excellent. You can hardly see where the damage was." Clara felt warmth rise in her cheeks at the praise. "I'm glad it meets your standards. The beadwork was too beautiful to risk damaging with careless repairs." "You have respect for good craftsmanship," he said, and it sounded like a compliment that went beyond just her sewing skills. "That is a rare thing." He paid her what she asked without haggling, and then, as he had mentioned before, produced several other items from the large pack he carried: a pair of leather gloves that needed new stitching, a rifle scabbard with a broken strap, and a pair of moccasins that had seen hard wear. Clara took each item and examined it carefully, making mental notes about the repairs needed, and was so focused on the work that she did not notice her shawl had slipped back slightly on her left arm until she reached for the moccasins and saw Elijah's gaze drop to her exposed wrist. The scars were thick and ropey, shiny tissue that ran from her wrist up under her sleeve in patterns that spoke of terrible burns, and Clara felt her heart plummet into her stomach as she watched for his reaction. This was the moment that always came eventually, the moment when people saw and everything changed. She started to pull her arm back to cover herself again, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Bennett," he said quietly, and there was nothing in his tone except a kind of gentle concern. "Those look like they must have hurt considerable." It was so far from what she expected that for a moment she could not respond. Not pity, not horror, not morbid curiosity, just a simple acknowledgement of pain. She looked up at him and found his green eyes steady on hers, patient and calm, waiting for whatever she chose to say or not say. "There was a fire," she heard herself say, the words coming out rusty from long disuse. "2 years ago in St. Louis, I got trapped in a boarding house when it caught fire. Someone pulled me out, but not before." She gestured vaguely at her arm, unable to finish the sentence. Elijah nodded slowly. "You were lucky to survive. Buildings fires are about the worst thing there is. I have seen men burned in the war, and it is a hard way to suffer." "It was not just my arms," Clara said, and she did not know why she was telling him this except that his matter-of-fact acceptance made it possible to speak. "It is from my neck down to both wrists, all across my shoulders and chest. People find it disturbing to see." "People are fools," Elijah said bluntly. "Scars just mean you survived something that tried to kill you. Nothing disturbing about that. It is the mark of someone strong." Clara felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen, some knot of shame and fear that had been wound there so long she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. "Most people do not see it that way. Most people do not know anything worth knowing," he said, and there was a hint of humor in his voice now. "I've got my own collection of scars, Miss Bennett, bullets and knives and claws, and one memorable incident with a broken whiskey bottle. Every one of them tells a story about a time I lived when I could have died. I figure that makes them worth having." "The town talks about me," Clara said, not sure why she was pushing this except to test whether his acceptance was real or just politeness. "They whisper about the scarred woman. They think I do not hear them, but I do." Elijah's expression hardened slightly, not with anger at her, but with something that looked like anger on her behalf. "Then the town needs better things to occupy its time. Your scars are no business of theirs or anyone else's, except as you choose to make it their business." He paused, and then added with deliberate emphasis, "For what it is worth, I think you are a beautiful woman, scars or no scars, but I expect my opinion does not count for much." Clara stared at him, unable to process what he had just said. Beautiful. He had called her beautiful, not in spite of the scars or looking past them, but in a way that suggested they were simply part of who she was and did not diminish her worth in his eyes. She realized her mouth was open slightly and closed it, swallowing hard against the sudden burning in her throat that meant tears were close. "Your opinion counts," she managed to say, "more than you might think." Something shifted in the air between them then, a recognition of possibility, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other across the counter while dust motes danced in the morning sunlight, and somewhere outside a dog barked twice and fell silent. Then Elijah cleared his throat and gestured to the items on the counter. "How long do you reckon for these repairs?" 2 weeks, Clara said, grateful for the return to practical matters even as part of her wanted to hold on to the moment that had just passed. "Maybe less if no big orders come in." "I will be back in 2 weeks then," he said. He settled his hat on his head and picked up his mended coat, but at the door he paused and looked back. "Miss Bennett, I come down from the high country once a month regular. If it would not be forward of me, I would like to make a point of visiting when I am in town. Just to talk, if you would not find that unwelcome." Clara felt her heart stumble over itself. "I would not find it unwelcome at all, Mr. Stone." "Elijah," he said. "Just Elijah." "Then you must call me Clara." He smiled, a slow transformation of his bearded face that made him look younger and less intimidating, and nodded. "Clara it is. I will see you in 2 weeks." After he left, Clara stood at the counter for a long time, her fingers pressed against the leather gloves he had left behind, wondering what had just happened and whether she had the courage to let it continue happening. She had been so careful for so long, building walls to keep people at a distance where they could not hurt her, but Elijah Stone had walked through those walls as if they were made of smoke and spider silk, and the terrifying thing was that she was glad he had. The 2 weeks passed both quickly and slowly, filled with steady work that kept her hands busy while her mind wandered in directions it had not traveled in years. She found herself thinking about Elijah at odd moments, remembering the way he had looked at her scars without flinching, the way he had called her beautiful, as if it were simple fact rather than opinion. She imagined conversations they might have, wondered what his life was like in his mountain cabin, pictured those strong hands carving wood or skinning game or doing any of the 100 tasks that survival in the wilderness required. Lily came by twice more with mending, and on the second visit she lingered after the transaction was complete, her sharp eyes taking in Clara's distracted state with knowing assessment. "You look different," she said bluntly. "Happier, maybe. Something good happen?" Clara hesitated, unused to confidences, but there was something in Lily's expression that invited trust. "There is a man," she admitted quietly. "He was kind to me. I do not know if it means anything." "The mountain man," Lily said immediately. "Elijah Stone. I saw him leave the store and you were watching through the window with a look on your face." She grinned suddenly, the expression making her look even younger. "He is a good one, Clara, quiet and keeps to himself. But I have never heard a bad word about him. And if you could see the way he looked at you when he was in here, you would not be wondering if it means anything." "How did he look at me?" Clara asked, then felt foolish for the question. But Lily's expression softened. "Like you were something precious that he was afraid of breaking. Like he wanted to protect you from the whole damn world if you would let him." Clara absorbed this, uncertain whether to believe it, but wanting to desperately. "I am not good at this," she confessed, "at letting people close. The fire changed me in more ways than just the physical." "The fire happened to you," Lily said firmly. "It does not get to decide who you are unless you let it. And from what I can see, you are stronger than you think." She moved toward the door, then glanced back. "Be careful, though. Robert Thornton was asking about you the other night, wanted to know where you came from and whether you had family. I did not tell him anything because it is none of his business, but he is not a man who likes being told no." After Lily left, Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She had not spoken to Robert Thornton, had in fact gone out of her way to avoid any contact with the man whose wealth and influence made him dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength. She told herself there was no reason to worry, that Lily's warning was just general caution, but the unease lingered at the edges of her awareness like a shadow she could not quite see. Elijah returned exactly 2 weeks after his last visit, and Clara had his repaired items ready and wrapped. But when he entered the store, she saw immediately that something was different. There was a tension in his shoulders that had not been there before, and when their eyes met, she saw worry there. "Is something wrong?" she asked immediately, coming around the counter without thinking. He shook his head, but the gesture was not entirely convincing. "Just heard some things in town that did not sit right with me. Nothing for you to worry about." "If it concerns me, then it is something for me to worry about," Clara said, with more firmness than she usually allowed herself. "Please tell me." Elijah studied her for a moment, then sighed. "There's a man in town, Robert Thornton, who apparently has been asking questions about you. Who you are, where you came from, whether you have family or a husband. The bartender at the Silver Bell is a friend of mine and thought I should know." Clara felt her stomach drop. Why would he be asking about me? I have never even spoken to him. "Men like Thornton think everything in their territory belongs to them," Elijah said, and there was an edge to his voice now, something dangerous beneath the calm surface. "And they especially think women belong to them. He has a reputation for pursuing women who take his interest and not caring much whether his interest is returned." "What should I do?" Clara asked, hating the fear she could hear in her own voice. Elijah stepped closer, not quite touching her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the solid presence that seemed to make the space around him safer. You should go about your business and not let him make you afraid, but you should also be careful. Do not go anywhere alone after dark, and if he approaches you, make sure there are witnesses around. Men like that are cowards at heart and do not like audiences for their worst behavior. You will be going back to your cabin, Clara said, and it was not quite a question. I will, he admitted, but not for 2 more days, and when I do go, I will be back sooner than usual, 3 weeks instead of 4. And Clara, if you need me for anything, you send word to the livery stable. They know how to reach me in an emergency. She nodded, taking comfort from his presence even as anxiety gnawed at her. Thank you for the warning. I wish I could offer more than a warning, he said quietly, and there was frustration in his voice now. I do not like leaving you here with that man sniffing around. Clara looked up at him, at the genuine concern in his green eyes, and felt something brave stir in her chest. Will you stay for coffee? I have a small stove in my workroom, and the afternoon is slow. I would like your company. Elijah's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise, followed quickly by pleasure. I would like that very much. They spent the next hour in her workroom, sitting on mismatched chairs with cups of strong coffee between them, and Clara found conversation with him easier than she had found it with anyone in years. He told her about his life in the mountains, about the cabin he had built with his own hands, and the wild beauty of the high country where eagles nested and elk grazed in meadows filled with wildflowers. He spoke of the solitude that had once been healing, but had lately begun to feel more like loneliness, and Clara recognized in his words an echo of her own isolation. She told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her father's cobbler shop and the way her mother had sung while she cooked, about the fire that had taken both her parents and left her alive but transformed. She told him about the 2 years since then, the succession of towns where she had tried to build a life only to be driven away by whispers and stares, and the hope she had begun to feel since coming to Salvation Creek. You should not have to keep running, Elijah said, his voice rough with emotion. You should be able to put down roots and build a life without people making you feel like you have to hide. I have hidden for so long, Clara admitted. I do not know if I remember how to do anything else. Elijah reached across the space between them and, very gently, took her gloved hand in his much larger one. The touch was careful, asking permission even as it offered comfort, and Clara found herself turning her hand over so their palms pressed together through the thin leather. You do not have to hide from me, he said quietly. Not ever. I have seen the worst things men can do to each other, Clara. I have seen bodies torn apart and minds broken and cruelty that would turn your stomach. Your scars do not frighten me or disgust me. They are just part of your story, and I would like to know all of your story if you will let me. Clara felt tears prick her eyes and did not try to blink them away. Why are you being so kind to me? Because you deserve kindness, he said simply, and because when I look at you, I see someone brave and strong and beautiful, and I would like the chance to know you better, if that is something you might want as well. It is, Clara whispered. It is something I want very much. They sat there in the afternoon light, hands joined, and something fundamental shifted between them. It was not love yet, not quite, but it was the beginning of love, the first tender shoots pushing through frozen ground toward the sun. Over the next few days, Elijah made good on his promise to stay nearby. He took a room at the boarding house and found reasons to stop by the store multiple times each day, sometimes with a genuine need for supplies, but often just to check on Clara and exchange a few words. His presence became a familiar comfort, and Clara found herself watching for him, listening for the sound of his boots on the boardwalk, smiling in ways that made Mr. Henderson give her knowing looks and say nothing. On the 3rd day, Robert Thornton finally made his move. Clara was alone in the store during the noon hour when Mr. Henderson had gone home for his midday meal. She was organizing spools of thread when the door opened and Thornton walked in with the confidence of a man who owned the world and everything in it. He was handsome in a conventional way, with carefully styled blonde hair and expensive clothes, but there was something cold in his blue eyes that made Clara's skin crawl. "Miss Bennett," he said smoothly, removing his hat with practiced charm, I have been hoping for a chance to introduce myself. I'm Robert Thornton." "Mr. Thornton," Clara said, keeping the counter between them, and her voice professionally polite. "What can I help you with today?" "I was hoping we might become better acquainted," he said, moving closer with the kind of casual entitlement that suggested he was not used to refusal. "I like to know the people in my town, especially attractive young women who have recently arrived." "That's kind of you, but I am quite busy with work," Clara said, taking a small step back. "If you need something mended, I would be happy to take your order." Thornton's smile hardened slightly around the edges. "Come now, no need to be unfriendly. I'm simply trying to extend a welcome. Perhaps you would join me for dinner at the hotel this evening." "I'm afraid that would not be appropriate," Clara said firmly. "I do not know you, Mr. Thornton, and I do not socialize outside of my work." Something ugly flashed in his eyes, quickly masked but unmistakable. "That is a shame. I'm a generous man to my friends, Miss Bennett, but I can be considerably less pleasant to those who spurn my friendship. This is a small town, and I have significant influence here. It would be wise to consider your position carefully." The threat was barely veiled, and Clara felt anger rise up to burn away her fear. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Thornton?" "Merely pointing out realities," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "A woman alone, with no family, no protector. She needs to be careful about who she offends. Accidents happen. Businesses fail. People find themselves unwelcome in places they thought were home." "I think you should leave now," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly but determined. "And I think you should know that I am not without friends, regardless of what you may believe." Thornton's expression turned ugly. "Friends? You mean that mountain savage who has been sniffing around you? Elijah Stone is nobody, a hermit who lives like an animal in the wilderness. He has no power here, no influence. If you are counting on him to protect you, you are more foolish than I thought." "Get out," Clara said, louder now. "Get out of this store immediately." For a moment she thought he might refuse, might do something worse than just issue threats. But then footsteps sounded on the boardwalk and the door opened to reveal Elijah Stone, his large frame filling the doorway and his expression turning thunderous as he took in the scene before him. "Is there a problem here?" Elijah asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Thornton turned, and Clara saw calculation flash across his face as he weighed his options. "No problem at all. I was just welcoming Miss Bennett to town, but I believe our conversation is concluded." He moved toward the door, but Elijah did not step aside, forcing Thornton to either stop or push past. They stood there for a long moment, two men of very different builds and very different kinds of power, and Clara held her breath waiting to see what would happen. "You are not welcome in this store," Elijah said finally. "If Miss Bennett has business to conduct with you, she can do so through an intermediary. But you do not come here in person again. Are we clear?" "You have no authority to tell me where I can and cannot go," Thornton said. But there was uncertainty in his voice now because Elijah was bigger and harder and infinitely more dangerous, despite Thornton's wealth and influence. "I have the authority of basic decency," Elijah said, "which you clearly lack. Now leave before I help you leave, and trust me when I say you would not enjoy that process." Thornton left, his face flushed with anger and humiliation, and Clara released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her legs felt weak, and she gripped the counter for support while Elijah closed the door and turned to her with concern written clearly on his face. "Did he hurt you?" Elijah asked, crossing to her quickly. "Did he touch you?" "No," Clara said. "He just threatened me. Told me I needed his friendship and that he could make things difficult if I refused it." Elijah's jaw clenched hard enough that she could see the muscle jump beneath his beard. "That worthless son of a snake. I should have thrown him out the window." Despite everything, Clara felt a small laugh bubble up. That would have been satisfying, but probably unwise. He is right that he has influence in this town. "I do not care about his influence," Elijah said fiercely. "He does not get to threaten you. He does not get to make you feel unsafe." Clara looked at him, at the protective fury in his eyes, and felt something in her chest expand and warm. "You came at exactly the right moment. How did you know?" "I did not know," he admitted. "I just had a feeling something was off and decided to check on you. I am glad I trusted my instincts." "So am I," Clara said softly. They stood there looking at each other, And then Elijah did something that surprised her. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and very gently cupped her face in his large, calloused hand. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone with incredible tenderness, and Clara felt herself lean into the touch like a flower turning toward the sun. "I need to tell you something," Elijah said, his voice rough. "And maybe it is too soon, and maybe I'm overstepping, but after what just happened, I think you should know. Clara, I am falling in love with you. I have been falling since the first moment I saw you, and every time we talk, I fall a little further. I do not expect you to feel the same way, not yet, but I want you to know that you are not alone. You have me, for whatever that is worth, and I'm not going anywhere." Clara felt tears spill over and did not care. "It is worth everything," she whispered, "and you are not alone in your feelings, Elijah. I feel it too, this pull between us. It frightens me because I have been hurt before, and I have learned to protect myself, but I do not want to protect myself from you. I want to be brave enough to let you in." "Then be brave with me," he said. "We will figure this out together." He leaned down slowly, asking permission, and Clara rose on her toes to meet him halfway. The kiss was gentle and careful, his lips soft despite the beard, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. Clara felt her whole body respond to the tenderness of it, felt walls crumble that she had built so carefully, and when they finally pulled apart, she was breathless and shaking and happier than she had been in longer than she could remember. "I have to go back to the mountains tomorrow," Elijah said, resting his forehead against hers. "But I'm coming back in 2 weeks like I said, maybe sooner. And Clara, I want you to think about something while I am gone. Think about whether you might consider coming up to see my cabin, spending some time in the high country with me. I know it is not proper and there would be talk, but I want to show you my world. I want you to see the place that has been my refuge and think about whether it could be yours too." "Are you asking me to leave Salvation Creek?" Clara asked, not quite understanding. "Arm. I am asking if you would consider building a life with me," Elijah said simply. "Up in the mountains where it is just us and the wilderness and no one to whisper or stare or judge. I'm asking if you would think about becoming my wife, Clara, when enough time has passed that you are certain of your feelings. I'm asking if you can see a future with me." Clara stared at him, stunned by the magnitude of what he was offering. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," he said. "I know you are strong and kind and talented. I know you have survived things that would have broken other people. I know that when I am with you, I feel less lonely than I have felt in years. And I know that I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to hide or run or feel ashamed of scars that are proof of your survival." He paused, searching her face. "But if it is too fast, if I am asking too much too soon, just say so. I will wait as long as you need." "It is fast," Clara admitted. "Faster than is wise, probably. But Elijah, when I look at you, I do not see a stranger. I see someone who understands me in ways that no one else has. I see a future that I thought I had lost the right to hope for. So yes, I will think about it while you are gone. I will think about everything you have offered and what it would mean to say yes." They spent the rest of that afternoon together, talking and planning, and simply being near each other. And when Elijah finally left that evening to return to his boarding house room, Clara felt both bereft and exhilarated. She lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about mountain cabins and green eyes and the possibility of a life built on love rather than fear. The next morning, Elijah stopped by before heading back to the high country. He brought her a small gift, a piece of polished pine carved into the shape of a bird in flight, its wings spread wide. "I made this last winter," he said, pressing it into her hands. "It was not made for you specifically because I had not met you yet, but looking at it now, it seems like it was meant for you all along. A bird that learned to fly again." Clara clutched the carving to her chest, feeling the smooth wood warm under her fingers. "It is beautiful. Thank you. 2 weeks," he said. "Maybe less if I can manage it. Be safe while I am gone and remember what I said. You are not alone anymore." Then he was gone, striding out of town with his long mountaineer's gait, his pack on his shoulders and his rifle in his hand. and Clara stood at the window watching until he disappeared into the pine trees that climbed the lower slopes. She set the carved bird on her windowsill where it caught the morning light and tried to imagine herself as brave and free as the creature it depicted. The trouble started 4 days after Elijah left. Clara was working late on a complicated alteration when she heard the sound of breaking glass from somewhere below. She froze, her heart suddenly pounding, and listened to the sound of footsteps on the stairs that led up to a room above the store. Heavy footsteps, multiple people, and then pounding on her door that rattled the frame. "Open up, Miss Bennett," a slurred voice called. "We just want to talk to you." Clara recognized the voice as belonging to one of Thornton's men, a brutal enforcer named Jack Reeves who had a reputation for violence. She looked around her small room desperately, but there was no second exit, no way out except through that door or through the window that was 20 feet above the alley. "Go away," she called back, trying to keep her voice steady, "or I will scream and bring the sheriff." Laughter answered her, ugly and confident. "Sheriff is dealing with a situation at the other end of town. Funny how these things work out. Now, open this door or we will break it down, and trust me, you do not want us to break it down." Clara grabbed the first thing her hand found, a pair of heavy scissors, and backed toward the window. She was trying to decide whether jumping was preferable to whatever Thornton's men had planned when another sound reached her, this one from outside. Shouting, and then a scream that was abruptly cut off, and then the most welcome sound she had ever heard. Elijah's voice, loud and furious. The pounding on her door stopped. There were sounds of a scuffle in the hallway, thuds and grunts, and at least one cry of pain. And then silence. Clara stood frozen, scissors clutched in her shaking hand, until a gentle knock came at her door. "Clara, it is me," Elijah called. "You can open the door. You are safe now." She fumbled with the lock and yanked the door open to find Elijah standing there, with blood on his knuckles and murder in his eyes, though his expression softened immediately when he saw her. Behind him in the hallway, 2 men were sprawled unconscious, or at least unmoving, and she recognized Jack Reeves among them. "How are you here?" Clara gasped. "You left days ago." "I got 5 miles out and could not shake the feeling that something was wrong," Elijah said. "Call it instinct or paranoia or divine intervention, I do not know. But I turned around and came back, made camp just outside town and have been keeping watch. Good thing, too." "They were going to hurt me," Clara said, and her voice broke on the words. "Thornton sent them to hurt me because I refused him." "He's going to regret that decision," Elijah said grimly. "But first we need to get you somewhere safe. Pack what you need for a few days. You are coming with me tonight." "Where?" Clara asked, but she was already moving, gathering clothes and her sewing supplies, and the small box of money with automatic efficiency. "To my cabin," Elijah said. "It is a hard ride, and we will have to go through the night, but up there you will be safe while we figure out what to do about Thornton. Because this cannot stand, Clara. He crossed a line, and there have to be consequences." Clara nodded, her hands moving quickly to gather her essentials. "What about those men?" "I will deal with them after we leave. They will wake up with splitting headaches and a message to deliver to their boss." His voice went cold. "The message is that if he ever tries something like this again, I will kill him. Not a threat, not a bluff, just simple fact. He does not get to terrorize women just because he has money and thinks he is untouchable." They left through the back stairs that led down to the alley, Clara following Elijah's silent footsteps through the darkness to where he had horses waiting. He helped her mount with easy strength and swung up onto his own horse, and then they were riding out of Salvation Creek under cover of night with the moon just a silver sliver overhead and the mountains rising black against the stars. The ride was long and difficult, following trails that Clara could barely see in the darkness, but that Elijah seemed to know by instinct. They climbed steadily, the air growing colder and thinner, and Clara clung to her saddle and tried not to think about what might have happened if Elijah had not turned back, if his instincts had not warned him that she was in danger. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the cabin, and despite her exhaustion, Clara felt her breath catch at the beauty of the location. Elijah's home sat in a small valley surrounded by towering pines, with a creek running clear and cold nearby, and mountains rising in every direction like protective walls. The cabin itself was solidly built from hand-hewn logs, with a stone chimney and real glass windows that caught the morning light, and Clara could see that it was the work of someone who took pride in craftsmanship and planned to stay. It is not much, Elijah said, helping her down from the horse with hands that lingered at her waist. But it is weatherproof and warm and far enough from civilization that you will be safe here. It is beautiful, Clara said honestly, looking around at the wild paradise he had carved out for himself. I can see why you love it here. He took care of the horses while Clara explored the cabin's single room, noting the neatly made bed in one corner, the table and chairs he had clearly built himself, the shelves lined with supplies and books that spoke of long, solitary evenings. Everything was clean and organized, the home of a man who lived alone but had not given up on order or comfort. You should sleep, Elijah said, coming inside and closing the door behind him. You have been through a terrible night and you are exhausted. You can have the bed and I will make a pallet on the floor. I do not want to take your bed, Clara protested. You are my guest and you have been terrorized by men who should have protected you, Elijah said firmly. You are taking the bed and that is final. Now, please, rest. We can talk about everything later. Clara was too exhausted to argue further. She lay down on the bed that smelled of pine and leather and something indefinably masculine, and despite everything that had happened, she felt safe for the first time in days. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Elijah settling onto his pallet near the door, positioning himself between her and any possible threat. And the last thing she thought was that she could get used to this, to having someone who would stand between her and danger without hesitation. She slept through the day and into the evening, waking finally to the smell of something cooking and the sound of rain pattering on the roof. Elijah was at the stove, stirring something in a pot, and when he saw she was awake, he smiled with such genuine pleasure that Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. "Welcome back," he said. "How do you feel?" "Better," Clara admitted, sitting up and pushing hair out of her face. "What time is it?" "Evening. You slept about 12 hours. Your body needed it after the shock of last night." He ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her. "Eat. It is just venison and vegetables, but it is hot and it will help." The stew was delicious, hearty, and flavorful, and Clara ate hungrily while Elijah watched with satisfaction. Outside, the rain continued its gentle percussion, and inside the cabin was warm from the stove and lit by the soft glow of lanterns. It felt domestic and intimate, and Clara found herself imagining what it would be like to live this way every day, to wake up in this mountain sanctuary with Elijah beside her. "We need to talk about what happens next," Elijah said when she had finished eating. "Thornton crossed a serious line last night, and the question is what we do about it." "What can we do?" Clara asked. "You said yourself that he has influence in town. The sheriff might not even believe us." "The sheriff will believe us because Jack Reeves and his friend are going to tell him exactly what happened, or else they are going to answer to me personally," Elijah said. "But the deeper question is whether you want to go back to Salvation Creek at all. Because, Clara, if you want to stay here with me, you can. I meant what I said before. I want to build a life with you, and that offer does not change just because circumstances have accelerated things." Clara looked at him, at the hope and determination in his green eyes, and felt her heart expand with certainty. "I want to stay," she said quietly. "Not because I am running away from Thornton, though that is certainly part of it, but because when I am with you, I feel like myself again. I feel like the woman I was before the fire, strong and capable and worthy of love. You give me that gift just by seeing me the way you do." Elijah crossed to her in 2 long strides and knelt beside the bed so they were at eye level. "You are worthy of love, Clara, scars and all. You're the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met, and I would be honored if you would consent to be my wife. Not someday in the distant future when enough time has passed, but soon as we can arrange it." "Yes," Clara said, and there were tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy and gratitude. "Yes, I will marry you, Elijah Stone. I will build a life with you in these mountains, and I will try every day to be as brave as you think I am." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, one hand tangling in her hair while the other curved around her waist, pulling her close. Clara kissed him back with all the pent-up longing and hope that had been building since the day they met, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard and smiling. "We should probably wait until after the wedding for anything more," Elijah said, his voice rough with desire. "But I'm going to struggle with that, fair warning." Clara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. I appreciate your restraint and your honor, and I will try not to make it too difficult for you. They spent the next few days in a kind of honeymoon before the wedding itself, getting to know each other in the enforced intimacy of the small cabin, while rain continued to fall and keep them inside. Elijah taught Clara about his life in the mountains, showing her how to read weather signs and identify animal tracks, how to fish in the creek and where the best wild berries grew. Clara taught him about her sewing, mending several of his worn shirts and altering others to fit his large frame better, and found profound satisfaction in the domestic act of caring for him in this small way. They talked endlessly, sharing their pasts and their hopes for the future, learning each other's preferences and quirks and fears. Clara told him about her childhood dreams of opening her own dress shop someday, and Elijah told her about the war and the things he had seen that had driven him to seek solitude. They discovered they both loved reading, that Clara was terrible at cooking but excellent at organization, that Elijah could play the harmonica and Clara could sing, and that they both valued honesty and loyalty above all other traits. On the fourth day, Elijah rode back down to Salvation Creek alone to settle matters with the sheriff and with Thornton. He was gone for hours that felt like days, and Clara paced the cabin anxiously until she heard his horse returning. He came through the door looking grim but satisfied and pulled her into a fierce hug before saying anything. "It is done," he said. "Jack Reeves confessed to the sheriff about Thornton ordering him to frighten you, and several other people came forward with stories about Thornton's harassment and threats. The sheriff arrested him, and there's going to be a trial. Thornton's influence is not what it was now that people are not afraid to speak against him." "Will he go to prison?" Clara asked. "Probably not for as long as he deserves, but long enough that he will not be a threat when he gets out," Elijah said. "And I made it clear to him and to everyone else in town that you are under my protection now and forever. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me personally." Clara pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of pine and leather and Elijah. "Thank you for everything." "Nothing to thank me for," he said, kissing the top of her head. "You are mine to protect now, Clara. That is what love means." They were married a week later in a small ceremony at the church in Salvation Creek, with Mr. Henderson as a witness and Lily standing up as Clara's attendant. Clara wore a simple dress she had made herself from blue fabric that matched her eyes, and Elijah wore his best buckskins, with his hair neatly tied back and his beard trimmed. The ceremony was brief and traditional, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Clara felt like she was stepping into a new life that bore no resemblance to the fearful existence she had been living. The town held a small celebration at the boarding house afterward, and Clara was surprised by how many people came to offer their congratulations. Women she had barely spoken to told her they were glad she had found happiness, and several men shook Elijah's hand and told him he was a lucky man. Even the sheriff stopped by to wish them well and assure Clara that Thornton's trial was proceeding and justice would be served. Lily pulled Clara aside during the festivities, her young face serious. "You are doing the right thing," she said quietly. "Elijah is a good man, and you deserve good things. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." "Thank you," Clara said, hugging her impulsively. "And Lily, if you ever need anything, if you ever want to leave the Silver Bell and start over somewhere, you come find us. There's always room in our home for friends." Lily's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "I might take you up on that someday. For now I'm glad you are safe and loved. That is all I wanted for you." They returned to the mountain cabin as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and deep purple. Elijah carried Clara across the threshold with ease despite her protests, setting her down gently inside and closing the door behind them on the rest of the world. They were alone now, truly alone, and Clara felt her heart racing with anticipation and nervousness in equal measure. "I am not experienced at this," she admitted quietly. "The fire happened before I had a chance to meet anyone, to court or be courted. I do not know what to expect." Elijah cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "Then we will learn together," he said. "And Clara, I need you to know that your scars do not matter to me except as proof of your courage. When I look at you, I see only beauty. But if you are uncomfortable or if you want to keep certain things covered, I will respect that. This is about us joining together, not about me examining you like some kind of medical curiosity. Clara felt tears prick her eyes at his understanding. I want to be brave, she whispered. I want to not feel ashamed of my body anymore, but I have hidden for so long that I do not know how to stop. Then let me help you, Elijah said. He took her hand and led her to the bed, lighting several lanterns so the room was warm with light rather than shadowed. We will take this as slow as you need. And Clara, I promise you, when I see you fully, all I will feel is gratitude that you are mine and awe that you survived. They undressed each other slowly, carefully, Elijah's large hands steady and patient as he helped her with buttons and laces. When her dress fell away and then her undergarments, Clara stood before him in just her chemise, the last barrier between exposure and safety. She saw his eyes on her, patient and loving, waiting for her to take the final step in her own time. Clara took a deep breath and pulled the chemise over her head. The scars were extensive, raised tissue that covered her chest and shoulders in patterns that looked almost like lace but were testament to terrible pain. They ran down both arms to her wrists, and there were smaller patches on her neck where the flames had licked at her skin. Clara stood trembling, waiting for his reaction, and when it came, it was not what she expected. Elijah let out a slow breath and then reached out to trace one of the scars with his fingertip, his touch feather light. You are so beautiful, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Clara, you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. These scars, they are part of you, part of your story, and I am honored that you trust me enough to show me. You really mean that, Clara said wonderingly, seeing the truth of it in his eyes. I really mean it, he confirmed. Then he smiled slightly. Though I should probably mention that I am also painfully aroused and trying very hard to be a gentleman about it, so if you are ready to move forward with this, I would appreciate the signal. Clara laughed despite her nervousness, and the sound broke the last of the tension. I am ready, she said. Show me what love feels like, Elijah. He did, with patience and tenderness, and a care for her pleasure that made Clara understand for the first time why people wrote poetry about physical love. Elijah touched her like she was precious, learning what made her gasp and what made her sigh, and when he finally joined their bodies together, Clara felt complete in a way she had not known was possible. They moved together in the lamplight, creating their own rhythm, and when pleasure crested and broke over her like a wave, Clara cried out his name and felt him follow her into that blissful release. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts Elijah had made himself, skin to skin with no barriers between them. Clara rested her scarred hand on his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart beneath her palm, and felt more at peace than she had since before the fire. I love you, she said quietly. I do not think I have said it clearly before, but I do. I love you, Elijah Stone, and I am grateful every day that you walked into that store. I love you too, he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. And I promise you, Clara, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on me. The months that followed were the happiest of Clara's life. She settled into the rhythm of mountain living, learning to cook over the wood stove and tend the small garden Elijah planted near the cabin. She set up a sewing area in the corner with the best light and took on mending work from the few other families who lived in the high country, supplementing Elijah's trapping income with her skilled needlework. They worked side by side during the days and fell into each other's arms at night, building a life based on mutual respect and deepening love. Clara discovered that she was stronger than she had thought, capable of chopping wood and hauling water and walking miles through the forest without becoming winded. Her body, so long hidden and treated as something shameful, became a source of pride as she saw what it could accomplish. Elijah's constant affirmation helped too, the way he touched her scars without hesitation, the way he told her she was beautiful every single day until she started to believe it herself. Winter came early in the high country, snow falling in October and not melting until April. But Clara found she did not mind being snowbound with her husband. They read books aloud to each other by the fire, played chess and cards, made love in the afternoon when the cabin was warmest, and talked about everything and nothing. Elijah taught her to play the harmonica, and she taught him the words to songs her mother had sung, and sometimes in the evenings they would make music together, simple and imperfect, but full of joy. It was during that first winter that Clara realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, her body feeling different in ways that were hard to articulate, but it was not until she woke one morning with nausea churning her stomach that she was certain. She told Elijah that evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction, and was rewarded with an expression of such pure delight that she felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his large hand on her still flat belly. "Clara, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. "Terrified, yes, because I do not know anything about babies, and the nearest doctor is in town hours away. But happy beyond measure that we created a life together. Clara, this is everything I never knew I wanted." The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite Clara's initial worries. Elijah was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting she rest more and do less, bringing her water and food and anything else she mentioned wanting. As her belly grew round with their child, Clara found herself amazed by the changes in her body, the way it could create life after having been so damaged. The scars stretched slightly to accommodate her expanding form, and she found that they no longer bothered her the way they once had. They were simply part of her now, part of the story that had led her to this mountain cabin and this man and this future she was carrying inside her. When the first hard labor pains came on a warm June afternoon, exactly 2 years after Clara had first arrived in Salvation Creek, Elijah rode down to fetch Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house, who had midwifed half the babies in the territory. The older woman arrived calm and competent, setting up in the cabin with the ease of long experience, and Clara was grateful beyond words for her presence. The labor was long and difficult, as first births often are, and there were moments when Clara thought she could not endure another contraction, could not push anymore. But Elijah stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping sweat from her face and telling her how strong she was, how brave, how much he loved her. And when their son finally slipped into the world with a lusty cry, Clara looked down at the tiny red-faced baby in her arms and felt her heart expand to accommodate yet another person in the circle of her love. They named him Thomas Elijah Stone, after Clara's father and his own, and he was perfect in every way. He had Elijah's green eyes and Clara's delicate features and a pair of lungs that made his presence known at all hours. Elijah took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else, changing diapers and walking the floor with a crying infant and looking at his son with such tender wonder that Clara sometimes felt her throat close up with emotion just watching them together. Lily came to visit when Thomas was 3 months old, arriving with a pack full of gifts and a tentative hope in her eyes. She had left the Silver Bell and was working as a laundress in town, saving money to start a dress shop of her own. She held Thomas with surprising confidence and told Clara she looked happy and healthy, and Clara invited her to stay for a week and rest from the demands of her new life. During that week, Lily confessed that she had met someone, a widowed rancher with 3 young children who needed a mother. "He is kind," she said wonderingly. "He does not care about my past or what I did to survive. He just sees me as someone who could make a good wife and mother for his kids." "Then you should marry him," Clara said firmly. "If he makes you happy and treats you well, the rest does not matter." "That is what Elijah says about your scars," Lily observed, "that they do not matter because they are just part of your story. I am starting to think maybe my past is the same. Just part of the story, not the whole book." "Exactly," Clara said. "We all have scars, Lily. Some of them just show on the outside." Lily married her rancher that fall, and Clara and Elijah rode down for the wedding with baby Thomas bundled against the cold. It was good to see her friend starting fresh, building a life based on hope rather than desperation. And Clara thought about how far they had both come from the women they had been 2 years before. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and small joys. Thomas grew strong and adventurous, learning to walk in the meadow behind the cabin and to help his father with simple chores. Clara became pregnant again when Thomas was 2, and this time delivered a daughter with relative ease, a little girl they named Sarah after Elijah's mother. The cabin began to feel crowded with 4 of them, so Elijah spent the next summer building an addition, 2 more rooms that gave them space to breathe and grow. Clara's sewing business expanded as word spread about her skill, and she took on increasingly complex projects, including wedding dresses and fancy gowns for the growing population of Salvation Creek. She taught Thomas to sew simple stitches and Sarah to sort buttons by color, involving them in her work the way her own mother had involved her. The children grew up knowing that their mother had scars but not being bothered by them, because to them it was simply part of who Mama was, no more remarkable than Papa's long hair or the way the creek ran cold year-round. When Clara was 30, 10 years after arriving in Salvation Creek, she and Elijah made the decision to build a small house in town for the winter months so the children could attend school regularly. They kept the mountain cabin as a summer home and refuge, but Clara found she enjoyed having neighbors again, enjoyed the female friendships she had formed with other women in town who had learned to see past her scars to the person beneath. Lily's dress shop opened the same year, with Clara as her business partner providing capital and expertise. They worked together 3 days a week, creating beautiful garments for the women of Salvation Creek and surrounding areas, and Clara found deep satisfaction in the work and the partnership. Her father would have been proud, she thought, to see what she had built from the skills he had taught her. Robert Thornton was released from prison after serving 5 years and immediately left Montana Territory for California. Clara heard the news with relief and realized that she no longer feared him or any man. She had Elijah, who would always protect her, but more importantly, she had herself. She was no longer the frightened, scarred woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Salvation Creek. She was a wife and mother and businesswoman, confident in her worth and secure in her place in the world. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Elijah took Clara back up to the mountain cabin for a week alone, their now teenage children staying with Lily and her family. They made the climb on horseback, following the familiar trail through the pines, and when the cabin came into view, Clara felt the same sense of homecoming she had felt the first time she saw it. That night, lying in the bed where they had first made love and later conceived their children, Elijah traced the scars on her shoulder with gentle fingers and said, "Do you remember what I told you the first time you showed me these? That you were beautiful?" "I remember," Clara said. "I did not believe you then, but I do now." "Good," he said, kissing the scarred tissue softly, "because it is the truth and always has been. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever known, inside and out. These scars are just part of what makes you uniquely you, and I would not change a single thing about you." Clara turned in his arms to face him, seeing the silver threading through his dark hair now, the lines that time and laughter had etched around his eyes. "I would not change anything either," she said. "Not the fire that brought me here, not the fear that made me run, not the whispers that made me hide, because all of it led me to you, and that makes every painful moment worth it." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the practiced ease of partners who knew each other's bodies as well as their own. And afterward, lying in the darkness with the sound of the creek singing below and the stars shining cold and bright through the window, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From scared and scarred in St. Louis, to desperate and hiding in Salvation Creek, to loved and whole in the mountains with a man who saw her truly, and loved what he saw. She thought about the whispers she still sometimes heard when new people came to town and saw her scars for the first time. But the whispers did not hurt anymore, because she knew they came from ignorance and fear, not from truth. The truth was what Elijah had told her all those years ago, and what she now knew in her bones. Scars were just proof that you had survived something that tried to kill you, and that made them badges of honor, not sources of shame. Clara pressed closer to her husband's warmth and closed her eyes, grateful beyond measure for the mountain man who had looked at her scarred body and said she was beautiful, who had meant it then and meant it now and would go on meaning it for all the years they had left together. She had come to the Wild West looking for nothing more than a place to hide, and instead she had found a home, a family, and a love that had healed wounds far deeper than the ones that showed on her skin. In the morning, they would wake and make breakfast together and walk down to the meadow to pick wildflowers. They would talk about their children and their plans for the future, and the small, everyday joys that made up a life. But for now, Clara simply rested in the peace of the present moment, in the arms of the man who had taught her that beauty was not diminished by scars, and that love, real love, saw past the surface to the strength and courage beneath. And she knew, with the certainty that comes from hard-won experience, that she was exactly where she was meant to be, living exactly the life she was meant to live, loved exactly as she deserved to be loved. The whispers might continue, but they no longer mattered. Because the only voice that mattered was Elijah's, telling her every day in word and deed that she was beautiful to him, scars and all, and that was more than enough. As sleep claimed her, Clara's last thought was of gratitude. Gratitude for survival, for second chances, for mountain cabins and green eyes and the wild beauty of the untamed West. Gratitude for scars that proved her strength, and most of all, gratitude for a love that had seen her at her most vulnerable and had chosen her anyway, completely and forever. It was more than she had ever hoped for, more than she had thought possible, and it was hers to keep for all the rest of her days. The end.